Here's our game plan. We're going out there this first half, and we're going to explode like a bomb. Then the second, we're just going to get higher. Third quarter, we're going to get higher. And the fourth quarter, we're just going to catch on fire, and that's our game plan. And let's just go out and do it that way.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
You're telling me, unidentified fish? You're telling me. Bill Peterson might truly be the worst head coach in the history of the NFL. I know there have been many bad coaches in the history of the league, but most of these guys are just run-of-the-mill bad. There's very few guys who are in that Urban Meyer tier of suck, where they were in over their heads to an almost absurd point, had no idea how to win, and alienated everyone in the process, and had no idea what they were doing. Bill Peterson was one of those guys. He truly has a claim for being the worst coach of all time of the 537 guys and counting to coach at least one game in the league. Bill Peterson coached 19 games for the Houston Oilers from 1972 to 1973. And across those 19 games, he went 1-18. It seems almost impossible to win just one game in 19 tries across multiple seasons, but Peterson found a way. Among the 379 coaches in NFL history to coach at least 15 games in the league, you won't be surprised to know that Peterson's winning percentage of 5.3% ranks dead last. For some perspective on how abysmal that winning percentage is, the record for most games coached in NFL history is by George Halas, who coached 497 games. If by some miracle Peterson coached 497 games and tied Halas with that winning percentage, he would have as many lifetime wins as Joe Philbin. That's how awful he was. The sad part is that Peterson wasn't a bad college coach, especially when he was at Florida State in the 1960s. The program had fallen on some hard times in the 50s, but Peterson led them to 3 top 15 finishes in the coaches poll and 4 bowl appearances, back when that meant something. But in the NFL, not so much. Look, there are some guys like Jimmy Johnson and John Robinson who can make the transition from the college game to the pro game pretty seamlessly. And then there are some guys that fall flat on their face, and Peterson was one of them. There are so many stories of how bad Peterson was, as you don't win just one game in 19 tries by complete accident. But this one has sort of slipped through the cracks, and it truly is an absurd story that deserves a deep dive more than half a century later. Because while every coach has a different philosophy on how to treat players as the season goes on, and as the wear and tear of a long physical year starts to take its toll, and while there might not be one completely correct way to do it, I can tell you that there's a wrong way to do it, and Bill Peterson did the wrong way. Much like I can't tell you the best study strategy for a test, I can tell you that if you decide the night before a test to get hammered and commit arson while jumping out the window, that's not a good strategy. And if you want any evidence of why Peterson sucks so much as the head coach of the Oilers, look no further than this story. Because this is the story behind what might just be, through no shortage of options, the dumbest moment of Bill Peterson's career. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, hype up that video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you've never heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and want to learn more, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for hyping up the video, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that Bill Peterson's plan, in his own words from his eloquent locker room speech, exploded. But before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand how the Oilers were looking up until this point. because to say that they were a bad football team through the first half of the 1972 season would be putting it lightly. 7 weeks into the season, and at the halfway point, the Oilers were a tire fire. They had bad seasons before, such as their 3-11 campaign in 1966 and their 3-win campaign in 1970 after the merger. But this was unlike anything else. This wasn't your average suckiness. This was advanced suckiness. Through 7 games, the Oilers were 1-6, with their only win coming against the lowly New York Jets, as the Oilers were tied with the Buffalo Bills and the Philadelphia Eagles for the worst record in the league. The offense had mustered up just 87 points, which was the second worst total in the league and the worst total in the AFC, and comes out to a measly 12.4 points per game. The defense was no better, having given up 195 points through 7 games, or close to 28 points per game. This was the second worst total in the league. When you have a bottom 2 offense and a bottom 2 defense, unsurprisingly, you're not going to win too many games. And sure enough, the Oilers had an abysmal bottom 3 point differential at this point of -108. The most embarrassing game of the bunch, by far, was their Monday night debacle at home against the Oakland Raiders, where they lost 34-0 in front of a national television audience, in a game best remembered today for a fan flipping the bird at the camera. If you want an idea of how bad things were for the Oilers, in Week 5 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, they lost 24-7 and finished the game with 0 passing yards. Despite finishing that game with 0 passing yards, I kid you not, that was more passing yards than they had the previous week against the Oakland Raiders, when they had -1 passing yard. I genuinely don't think we'll ever see that again, where over a 2-game stretch, a team actually has negative passing yards. But leave it to the 1972 Houston Oilers to set records for ineptitude everywhere. And it wasn't like the Oilers were losing close games and just getting super unlucky. They were getting severely outclassed. Houston had turned the ball over in each of their first 7 games, had a 4-game stretch where they put up 7 or fewer first downs 3 times, and couldn't stop a nosebleed in run defense, as in 4 of their first 7 games, the opposition ran for at least 230 yards. Opponents were averaging over 200 yards per game on the ground against the Oilers, which is roughly what the Oilers were averaging on offense, period. And in their most recent outing prior to the story in this video, a 30-7 defeat on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals, which somehow wouldn't even be close to their worst game against the Bengals that season, as we would later find out with their season-ending debacle where they lost 61-17, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The Bengals had triple the first downs that the Oilers had, winning that battle 29-10, and more than triple the yardage that the Oilers had, winning that battle 496-145. All while the Bengals had multiple players run for over 100 yards, and all while Oilers quarterbacks Kent Nix and Dan Pastorini combined to complete just 7 passes for 65 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, a completion percentage of 41%, and a passer rating of 27.8, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Bottom line, we were halfway through the season, and there was no hope in Houston for the Oilers to do anything. The Bill Peterson experiment was a complete and utter disaster. They were 4 games back of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Cincinnati Bengals atop the AFC Central, and 4 games back of the wild card, so they were not making the playoffs. Any hope of a 1970 Bengals-esque turnaround, where the Bengals started 1-6 and came back to win the division, was not happening. I'll put it that way. As one writer said at the halfway point of the season, the end of daylight savings time was not particularly good news for Houston Oilers coach Bill Peterson. It means that the season will last an hour longer. Still, you had 7 more games to play. You had to find a way to power through this absolutely disastrous campaign and find a way to end on somewhat of a high note. And with the Oilers acquiring some players and seeing who could play for this team the rest of the way, including running back Paul Robinson, acquired from the Cincinnati Bengals after he won Offensive Rookie of the Year for the expansion club in 1968, and running back Fred Willis, who was also acquired from the Bengals, Peterson had an idea to get the guys to gel and play better. That idea? Two-a-days. Seriously. Bill Peterson thought that it was a good idea to have his team and his players go through two-a-days, meaning that the team would practice in the morning and practice in the evening. Today, two-a-days are outlawed, as the NFLPA fought hard to have those removed in the 2011 CBA. But back in the day, they were extremely commonplace, and just about every team used them to get their guys into shape and make sure they understand the plays and the playbook. However, when these teams ran two-a-days, they were running them in training camp. They weren't doing this in the middle of the freaking season. Two-a-days were commonplace and were used to make sure the guys got into football shape and built up stamina, especially at a time when many of these guys worked jobs in the off-season and didn't have the training regimen that they do today. They weren't used halfway through the year when their bodies have experienced the wear and tear of getting hit constantly and when they were already in shape. Heck, most teams in the middle of the season aren't even tackling in practice. They're not going with contact drills. They're trying to preserve their players, and the coaches and the training staff are easing off on them so they can stay healthy for the home stretch. Meanwhile, here was Bill Peterson, crazy enough to do two-a-days in the middle of the season with a 1-6 team. Go to practice in the morning, go to practice in the evening, run the plays, make tackles, make contact, just live in the facility all day long, I guess, and just treat practices in November during the season like they're practices in July. As Peterson said about his ball club in the build-up to the game in Week 8 against the Browns, we're doing it for at least a couple of days. We've got new people, and we need more work. That's all. But surely, there's a better way to get work in and integrate the new people into the squad than doing two-a-days when everyone is gassed and already in football shape, as in the main reason you do two-a-days. It's also very different during training camp when everyone is living together and in one centralized location versus during the season, when everyone is living in their actual homes or apartments. Two-a-days suck on the players during training camp, but I at least understand it and why coaches utilize it to whip everyone into shape and to get players to dig deep and develop toughness and stamina and resilience, and give the players a common bonding experience to unite them as a team. But here, in the middle of the season, when you've already been through the ringer over and over again, there's nothing about this that makes any sense. And as Fred Willis, one of the newcomers on the team, said about Peterson's strategy, it's the first time I've ever been to two-a-days during the season. I'm sure literally everyone else felt the same way, seeing as Bill Peterson was taking this team right here and doing the exact opposite as every other coach was doing. There's a reason no teams run two-a-days in the middle of the season. I'll put it that way. But, okay, this man right here, Bill Peterson, had an idea that, on the surface, seemed crazy. Every other coach knows to ease up as the season goes along and to reduce the practice schedule and the amount of contact you're having your players take on non-game days. But while this idea might seem crazy, a lot of ideas seem crazy at the time. Peterson might be ahead of his time. Peterson might be a revolutionary. They mocked Galileo for saying that the Earth revolved around the sun and not vice versa. They mocked the Savannah Bananas when they introduced Banana Ball. Maybe this was a good idea. Maybe this was the spark to get the Oilers going. The Cleveland Browns, sitting at 4-3, were a darn good football team, and a team that would end up making the playoffs that season. It might take something unconventional to beat them. You might have to reinvent the wheel. If you, using the two-a-days strategy, can find a way to defeat a heavy 10-point favorite, even if your players might hate you for running them through hell and back, you might have something on your hands. And sure enough, at least for 1 week, Bill Peterson was a genius. The Oilers played lights out. They played the greatest game that anyone had ever played. They dominated on both sides of the ball. They shocked the NFL world. Who am I kidding? They absolutely sucked. What the hell did you think was going to happen? Yeah, turns out when you run two-a-days in the middle of the season, your players are completely exhausted and gassed by the time game day hits. And while I'm not saying that the Oilers win this game right here if they did what every other team did, because I'm not sure anything was saving Peterson and the Oilers at this point, this definitely didn't help. The Browns dominated. They smoked the Oilers. The Browns won the game 20-0, giving the Oilers their second shutout loss of the season in what was an entirely predictable outcome. The Oilers didn't force a single turnover, while the Browns ran for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns on 4 yards a carry. Houston's offensive line took a beating, as Dan Pastorini and Ket Nix combined to get sacked 4 times. And believe me, this game could have been a lot worse. It's tough to get worse than a shutout 20-point loss, but it could have been worse, as on 3 separate occasions in the first half, Browns quarterback Mike Phipps got his signals crossed and had a miscommunication. Had it not been for that, this game could have been an even uglier bloodbath than it ended up being. It's absolutely shocking, I tell you, that the Oilers lost this game to the Browns and did not reap the benefits of doing two-a-days in the middle of the season. Like I said at the start, there's no one correct way to manage a team's workload as the season goes on. Each coach is different, each player is different, and each team is different. But there's a reason that teams don't do two-a-days in the middle of the season. And Bill Peterson found that out the hard way in 1972, as the Oilers not only lost this game against the Browns, but lost every other game that he coached the rest of the way, and every other game in 1972, with all but 2 of the losses in 1972 coming by double digits, because they were a bad team that was made even worse by the fact that they were completely exhausted because their coach had run them into the ground at a time when no other coach was doing that, because even the toughest coaches knew to back off as the year went on. If Bill Peterson was a jockey, he'd be the guy who was the jockey of the horse at the very back of the field by more than 20 lengths, and would whip the horse over and over again, even as the horse was limping. Bill Peterson sucked as a head coach, and among the plethora of stories about Peterson's disastrous 1.5-year tenure with the Oilers that felt like 10 years, this might somehow be the craziest of them all. Because in 1972, Bill Peterson was so bad that he couldn't even muster up 2 wins despite doing two-a-days. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.